Get rolling. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Virginia is for Conspiracy Lovers. Super stoked. Tonight we have one of my favorites to listen to on other people's podcasts. We've had him on once before talking about the Finders, Mr. John Brisson of Fix Your Gut, and um, we've read the documents. And what's the podcast that I just discovered
Uh,
that you've had for a couple years that I didn't even realize existed?
I think you might be talking about "Buy Their Fruits" that I do
Buy
with
their
my
fruits. Yeah.
co-host Jeremy Stone.
Good
Um,
stuff on there, man.
Thank you, brother.
I'm so embarrassed. I was like, I've searching your name to find you like all these different places so that I could, like we were talking about. I don't generally listen to, I mean, I listen to regular podcast hosts and specific podcasts for the most part, but for the really for the most part, what I do is I follow guests that I like around and listen
Yeah,
to their perspective when they're talking to other people of other perspectives and how you can kind of weed out some of the bullshitters in that way too. I found that, you know. Anyway, John Brisson, super stoked to have him on. We were talking before we got on. I think we're gonna continue on a little bit further on our discussion about the Finders cult that was based out of the DC, Virginia area that we talked about the last time he was on, and take it a little bit further than what what most discussions on the Finders usually get. I think we kind of stopped at the logical kind of end of the early years kind of situation with them. So um yeah, you said you've been writing some stuff about the process with them in Virginia and whatnot. So have at it, man.
yeah. Hopefully I'll finish my book this year. I know it's been in writing for 6 years, but it takes time, especially when I got over 100. I got 300 plus pages published on Substack, over 1,000 plus sources. Like I did my best. Okay, trying to be as accurate as I possibly humanly can. We all have, confirmation biases. We all have cognitive biases, but I tried to make it as matter of fact as possible. My writing style as an INTP is kind of wooden. So, if you're wanting, an INFP kind of like flowery insert in kind of like excerpt after every chapter, you're not really going to get it with me. I'm
I
sorry.
prefer
But
textbook
if
when
you
it
want
comes
the
to this stuff.
facts, you're gonna
Yeah.
get that's what I'm gonna give you. I'm not gonna give you much speculation on my point, but I'm just gonna say this is what it is to the best of my ability.
Amen, man.
So I started researching Virginia because I'm towards the end. I'm about to talk about the 1993 reopening of the case, and I just had spent a whole chapter talking about what happened down there as far as the Tallahassee investigation in Florida in 1987, and then wrote about what happened in Washington D.C. with Ramon J. Martinez and what
Right.
most people know about the his report of investigation about the warehouse being searched, as well as the W Street apartment buildings in DC, both being in DC. And I talked with Ramon J. Martinez's customs partner and got some information from him that wasn't previously known before.
Wow.
I brought forth the kind of the DC memo that was put forth by the Washington Metropolitan Police Department that was previously redacted. I got the actual full copy and released that, and also wrote about that in my book as well too. And so so finally I got to the part about Virginia. And a lot of people don't know that they searched the Free State and the farms in Virginia that were around the Nethers Culpeper region. And they
Wait, did
searched.
you say Free State?
Yeah, so they had a whole bunch of acres that Marion Petty supposedly claimed. I think we talked about it last time that he had gotten them from gambling winnings when he was in the Army Air Corps.
Okay,
But when in
right, yeah.
reality, it seems like to me that Charles Marsh had given him the money to purchase all this acres of land in the Virginia, Nethers, Culpeper region, all out by Old Rag Mountain.
Right.
But
Is that a town now called like Free State,
no, not to my
Virginia?
knowledge. No, there may be since then, but I'm talking about in that region. It's just what he called the area of land that he owned near Old Rag Mountain.
Okay.
Um, and so
I
that
think it might be, dude, because
Maybe.
I don't want to derail you too much, but I randomly started getting a little like curious about this is a side topic, but there was when I was in school, when I was in elementary school,
Hmm.
I got pulled off to the side to go to one of the gifted like
Yeah,
program,
me too.
right? I did it once and then they never asked me back. But I could clearly remember all the kids that it was like seven of us that I knew all through school, and there was like seven of them who I don't know them much anymore. I'm still acquainted with some of them. Um, but what I know of every single one of them, one just retired as a nuclear naval sub
Mm,
commander.
mm,
One came to my restaurant not long ago, hadn't seen him since high school. Asked him where, well, what are you doing around here? He came for his anniversary at my restaurant, and he said, "Oh, we're living," and he said in Mechanicsville, Virginia, which is like a neighborhood off of, Richmond, but it's kind of like this. I don't want to disparage Mechanicsville, but I was surprised because I he said he was a pilot. And I was like, "Oh, what are you doing in Mechanicsville?" And he was like, "There's an airfield of some sort there." And we got to talking more, and he said he had been in Africa for a number of years, flying
mm.
planes. And I was like, I think he could see the confusion on my face, and he just straight up told me that he was like, well, I've been flying spy planes for that's what I've done
Mm.
for my whole career. And I guess he's not doing that anymore, but so he was one of those that was pulled into the gifted. And there's like three or four other ones who have equally as interesting and like kind of deep statey kind of jobs. And there was one girl and her family. I don't know if one specific person, and I don't know why I was interested in this person, but I was like, let me see if I can Facebook stalk track this person down. And her family, her uncle played with the dead I'll just say it.
Mm.
Her uncle was Bruce Hornsby.
Mm.
And so from my hometown, like the Hornsbys are, a big deal. They're from Williamsburg. And this particular person was the niece of Bruce Hornsby, and then she went to private school, and so I was just kind of stalking her out, and she's just like this like folk musician, but she lives in this. I'm not going to give all her information. What am I doing? Anyway, something about Free State, Virginia, or something like that came up, and I was like, weird, and it seemed like the town had somewhat strange origins, but now I can't remember. That was a really long, boring story for just to say that I was creepily stalking my friends and wondering if they got indoctrinated and they told me and then they just gave me one test and were like, "Yeah, no, not you, bro. You look
Well,
like a stalker."
I had
I
a
don't know.
friend. I had a friend that his he grew up in the Jehovah's Witness cult, and from high school, and he ended up in a theosophical society outside of Brevard, North Carolina. I mean, sometimes it
Really?
happens,
Yeah.
like
I was really hoping that when I tracked this person down and found their Facebook that they were going to have some high level security like job, and it was like a folk musician, which makes sense with the family, and then just lives kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But then you said that name and it rung a bell, and I was like, "Wait a minute."
Well, maybe, you mentioned Richmond. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've driven. I mean, I live in Fayetteville, right? So
Yeah.
Richmond's only 3 hours away.
Yeah.
Closest Brazilian steakhouse until they finally opened up one in Durham,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know where Mechanicsville is, it's
Yeah.
off of 295,
Yep.
I I don't know because the Free State was kind of like the area because you have Culpeper down here and you have interestingly enough right Highway 666, right, and then over here a little
No
bit
shit.
to the west you have the mountains. You have Old Rag Mountain, you have Etland, Virginia, and Nethers, Virginia, which they had cabins and properties throughout that whole area, and and so they had gotten a tip, I believe, from this woman who I believe was dating John Cox, who was a former Finders member, who later left the group. And he was being harassed. The lawyer that represented him was being harassed by the finders.
Right.
And so she had said that there were bodies that were buried on, those properties. So the Virginia State Police went out there with a backhoe and cadaver dogs and started trying to find to see if there was any dead bodies that were buried out there in those locations. They didn't find anything, as far as that is concerned. They found a lot of, a couple of cabins with computer equipment that had missing, just like, I had found out that the finders had computer equipment where they were training CIA agents through future enterprises at the warehouse there, that the computer equipment magically got missing before the warehouse was raided. And that was because they had these desks and they had the outlines of computer monitors and keyboards and stuff that were on the desks because they hadn't never
Right.
dusted the desks, you know? And so it was the same way that was reported in the newspapers in Virginia. And they had a giant satellite out there, which they needed those for the TRS-80 computers that they were using to communicate with, as well as, of course, the telexes, as well as, of course, they had radar dishes at the warehouse, supposedly, where they were shooting pornography. Allegedly, they were shooting child pornography, allegedly, supposedly.
Uh,
So and again, with the finders, I want to make this known, which I've said, unless I make a specific claim, like Theodore Reese in his 80s was arrested and convicted of having child porn, okay, like in his 80s, like 10 years ago, okay, so that I can make a claim that former finders member, Theodore Reese
yeah.
is a pedophile. All right. But as far as that, like, I don't know, like, as far as, so-called production of pornography, the so-called production of child pornography, I don't know who's involved in that as far as the finders is concerned. I can say that Marion Petty, as being the leader, was likely very much involved, at least knew of it. But, unless I make specific claims that I know for sure, like Theodore Reese, I'm not saying all of them were guilty. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I will say that that again, the whole bodies, was it finders member Barbara Sylvester, and then the suspiciousness of her death. They were saying that she was buried there, possibly, allegedly, which is what the confidential informant was saying. um but they weren't able to find any bodies in the region. And I found out something that I discussed, and I have to go back and look at my subset to get the specific ages, but there was kind of like this camp that I believe it was Finders member who was former Green Beret, who was like the a doctor for the Finders and the kids, Ronald Alleman. They called him Lucky. Had brought in this kid that was in his teenage years who was unable to really speak and was acting very strange, which is characteristics of the Finders kids. But all of them were members of, there were kids of the Finders members, and all of them were from the ages between 7 and 1. Well, this child, who, or this teenager, should I say, whoever it was, with the finders that they had brought into this camp, um, is some unknown kid. I don't know who he is at all. Again, that's suspicious. But the kid also exhibited the same, um, verbal speaking issues, the knowledge of items that in the, the weirdness that the finders kids had. So who was that teenage boy that they had brought in? Because he wasn't, to my knowledge, any of the finders kids. They didn't have any of that age that was old enough. So that
Right.
was weird to find out that through the newspaper, newspaper articles, and being so knowledgeable of the case. I was like, well, wait a minute, like what? And so that was interesting. And I'll say one final thing. I'm not going to write about this in my book because I've not been able to substantiate it, but I will briefly mention it. I got it from good authority, for someone who knew the case very well, that they were investigating the finders using private investigators to determine whether or not they were involved with the murder of clergy members in the Midwest. and I could not
Really?
sustain, like, names were given of the PIs. I couldn't find them. But the person who told me is very well esteemed in law
Yeah.
enforcement. All right. And it's not Ramon J. Martinez, if anybody asks. It's not him. I'll at least say it's not him. And
Okay.
it's not his partner, Bob Harold, either. Okay.
Okay.
But the reason why I don't write about that in the book, and I'll talk about it on podcasts, is because I can't verify that. I can only say what was told to me, you know? So again, that's high speculation. Now, was that what they were searching for with the bodies in Virginia? I don't know. I do believe they were searching for Barbara Sylvester's body. They were unable to find her. The finders claim that Barbara Sylvester was buried in an unmarked grave near the W Street apartments. They claim that she died of appendicitis. They claim that they were trying to give her like psychic energy healing and like all this
Hmm.
stuff, and she ended up dying from it. Some people were saying that she wanted to break away from everything and go back to her family. Some of the accounts were that. Some of the accounts were that she'd gotten too powerful out of all the women, and I don't know. I err on the side of caution that she probably just did have appendicitis and she just died, to be honest.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know. So were they searching for her body in the Nethers region, the cabins in Etland, Virginia?
So
Probably.
real quick,
Yeah.
just I did look up Free State, Virginia, and that is the town. It's about 20 minutes from Old Rag Mountain.
Hmm.
It seems like kind of a hippie-ish
Yes.
area.
Yes, it is. It is. That
That
was the Free State.
that's where she lives. Sorry.
That is the Finder's Free State. I can't say it's not.
Dude, and there's like a Free State Academy, which is like a Christian private school that's out there. Again, I don't know any of this. It's just you said Free State, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of the
I didn't
town
even
of
know there
Free
was a
State,
city.
Virginia.
I just knew that that
Yeah.
was an area that the Finders, because Marion
Well, it's
Petty
always
owned
been called the Free State. It used to be called Nicksville because they
Nixville.
started a church there, um, either just before or just after the Civil War that accepted people of all races. Like it's been like kind of a hippy dippy town like from its inception. I just looked at it. It might be worth like peeking
Oh,
into
okay. So
what.
so it's not called Free State, it's called Free Union.
So I just looked it up. It's got so like the school in the town is called Free State Academy.
The school
It's
might be, yes, but the area that I'm
Albemarle
talking.
County, Free State, a historic community of free African American. It was originally called Free State. It was called Nicksville and then Free State, and it's probably Free Union.
Which is up there by Charlottesville, which is the Charlottesville areas would be Albemarle County is, right?
Yep,
So
Charlottesville.
it is
30 to
it is northwest, but not by that much.
Yeah, like 20-minute drive they say um to the south of the Old Rag trailheads.
Because
Now,
that's what it was. It was a hippie compound where people could go live at. That's why it was called the Free State. There's like a place very similar to that in the
yeah.
West. I can't think of the name of it. Can you think of the name of it offhand, Ernie? You know what I'm talking about, right? Where
Well, I know
RVs
the
can go and camp, and there's a specific name for it. It's very famous. I can't believe
oh
it escapes.
yeah, I don't know what it's called, but I know what you're talking about. I've watched a couple little videos on it.
The Free State's the same thing.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to maybe look into modern day what's going on in that town. It's kind of like that Virginia town. Have you ever heard of that Virginia town somewhere out west where it might be in West Virginia actually, where they've outlawed all um satellite and cell
Yeah,
phones
so that's
stuff.
that's the mountain range between Virginia and West Virginia. That's called the radio free or radio dead zone.
Yeah,
It's United
there's got
States sanctioned.
there's got to be something weird there, right? Am I
Yeah,
crazy?
I mean there has to be. You can't use
What?
Wi-Fi, you can't use cell phone signal.
There's got to be something
They claim
insane
it so
there,
they
right?
can monitor space accurately. Okay, that's what they claim from what I
What the
remember about
town does
research.
not look like, your Huntsville, Alabama, where like all the NASA people are. You know what I mean? It looks like a rundown podunk. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No, no, no.
rail
So you're
again.
right. It's the United States National Radio Quiet Zone or Radio Free Zone, and it's on the border of Virginia and West Virginia.
Yeah. Mm, yeah, sounds weird. It's just another weird Virginia town that makes no sense. But sorry, continue, man.
No, no, it's okay. I used to think about that if for people that are EMF sensitive to go live out in the,
Yeah,
the United States National Radio Quiet Zone. I knew
yeah,
some people I used to coach for Fix Your Gut that had to go spend some time out there because they were non-native EMF sensitive.
yeah.
So sometimes, I mean, that would make sense. So
Um, what's the latest date wise that that things happened within the kind of finders investigations and whatnot? Like other than what you're doing, official investigations like
1993 was the last official thing.
90 93. Did it
Yeah.
get shut down again
Yes.
after? So it's repeatedly as it gets opened up, it gets
Yeah, it was reopened by Council for National Policy member Charlie Rose, who was
yeah,
from Fayetteville area.
yeah,
He was yeah, congressman, and Tom Lewis out of Florida. Now, I think Tom Lewis was I'm not going to say nobody's our guy, but I think he was legit for the finders, working with
really.
former CIA um agent turned private investigator Skip Clements, who he gave me a lot of information about the finders, and like he was the one that knew that they were running a diplomat, sexual diplomat compromise out of the warehouse, and I could not back that up. But it was released in the FBI vaults finders documents where there was a Washington Metro Police report from the early 90s, I think it's 1991, where a cop went there and saw these diplomat limos going into the warehouse late at
Right, I
night,
remember you
in and
talking
out.
about that. Yeah,
And then they say they're babysitting kids and seeing kids playing. And he said, this is the warehouse where child pornography was shot. That was in his report.
do you think that this was an early Epstein-esque
Yes.
situation? I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of obvious. I mean, anybody who's
But
listening to the
Epstein was more
information.
than just child,
I think
trafficking
so.
compromise. It was
Yeah, I think
intelligence
so too.
gathering. Like I said with Marion Petty, it was one of my main crux of my whole argument was it was the steering of the counterculture movement. That's what the
Yeah.
Finders was infiltration and information gathering and steering of the counterculture movement.
Do you is it your opinion then that the troubles with the investigations and stuff kind of shut them down for the most part, or they just morphed into other
They shut down.
whatever?
They
They
shut down
shut
for the
down.
most part, yes.
Yeah.
After Marion Petty died, it kind of just, I mean, there's still, there's the Finders ARG, which had nothing to do with the Finders. I don't know who was doing these alternative reality games or alternate reality games, kind of that was pushed around the same time that my belief is it was part of the QAnon operation. It was part of McChrystal and
Yeah.
Flynn. It was part of Bannon. It was part of CMP. But, when they were running kind of like the Pizzagate ops that were,
Yeah.
and I ain't saying that there ain't issues with Alphonsus and Brock and stuff like that. And
Right.
Tucker Carlson was a two-time mentioned in two separate restaurant reviews for Common Pizza Ping Pong as being a VIP frequent. And the whole, you go back, I got streams on Tucker
Really?
Carlson's relationship and his dad, Dick Carlson.
Yeah, yeah.
They had the brat pack of conservatism. David Brock was a member of that with Matt Drudge, with Tucker Carlson, in the late 90s or early 2000s, right? And so, they all, that nexus was formed by Dick Carlson, who also, was a major, he was head up in charge during the 90s of Voice of America, and worked very strongly with the both the Bush administration when they put him up for ambassador to Seychelles, George H.W. Bush, and Reagan, of the whole savings and loan scandal and stuff like that. I've done like 20 something streams exposing Dick Carlson and Tucker Carlson at this point.
Really?
But yeah, so he was Tucker was very close to James Alphonsus and David Brock. Very close.
I had no idea. Wow. Ha have you seen any, you know that doctor who um I don't know if he's a doctor. I think he might have a doctor before his name. He's an author, kind of a Reiki proponent. Um, he's mentioned in the Epstein files. He wrote a book called The Finders.
Oh, you're talking
Read
about
it.
Jeffrey Martin,
Yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
Jeffrey.
I just
He
found it
has no connections to the finders
whatsoever.
whatsoever, other than writing that book, to my knowledge. Now,
God, could he have picked a
I
worse
looked back
name?
in the day, like I looked like I saw that name, that title for Jeffrey Martin, and I was like, I was like,
Yeah.
huh?
And then he pops up in the Epstein stuff, and I was like, oh, what?
Which kind of makes sense with that whole nexus because you have Dean Radin popping up and the outing of Deepak Chopra couldn't happen to a nicer World Future Society member, you
Right, right,
know?
right.
So I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that to be. I mean, I even looked it up when I noticed it. I looked it up and tried to dig for any kind of
I couldn't find anything.
confirmation bias, even something, and it's just like, no, this guy pushes Reiki crap,
The
and
only thing I could
I mean, he
find,
was saying some pretty off color crap in
oh,
the emails,
of
but other than
course.
that, I yeah,
The only person I can find about Jeffrey Martin is he's the World Future Society with Deepak Chopra and Barbara Marx
yeah,
Hubbard and that whole crowd. So they push each other's work back and forth.
he
So,
did have
which Marion Petty found the World Future Society for tying it back to the finders with Barbara Marx Hubbard, funding through Barbara Marx Hubbard and Edward
wait,
Cornish,
say that
so it all
again.
connects.
Marion Petty, say that one more time.
Marion Petty was a founding member of the World Future Society with Barbara Marx Hubbard and Edward Cornish. He was really good friends with Edward Cornish.
And this Finders book writer,
Is a
Martin.
member of the World Future Society, or
Oh
at
well,
least around those circles of the World Future
yeah,
Society in modern times.
that's a
Yes.
fairly substantial connection, possibly.
Yeah, but I mean,
I mean,
like
how big is
again,
the World Future Society as far as
I
membership goes, do you
mean,
think?
there were a lot of very important people in it, like Maurice Strong, for example. Which used to be
Okay.
Alex Jones's boogeyman before George Soros.
Okay.
No fan of Maurice Strong. I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
no fan. I'm not trying to defend Maurice Strong or George Soros, but that would be who Alex Jones would pin it on.
Right.
Everything and stuff like that. So, and I could name other people in the World Future Society as well that were very pretty much a lot of your futurism, which that's why Marion Petty was a major member of the World Future Society because they push a lot of modern day science fiction or the controlling of science fiction. I mean, Gene Roddenberry, Ray
Right.
Bradbury, Stanley Kubrick, like so many people within movie making and science fiction were members of the World Future Society or invited to join or spoke at the World Future Society. We had former presidents like Gerald R. Ford speaking at the World
Yeah.
Future Society. I mean, it is I believe the future replacement if one exists of the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab's mentor was World Future Society member founder Herman Kahn. So I mean, like it doesn't
Yeah.
and most people don't even know about the World Future Society. And like I said, the steering of science fiction. And you have famous psychologists, Abraham Maslow, hierarchy of needs. He was a World Future Society member.
Mm.
So if you give me a minute, I could pull up the list. I don't have everybody, but I have a good working list
Yeah.
of people. Let me
Yeah,
pull it up real
that's
quick.
I mean, I guess it could be as I don't know if you call it innocent, but as a group of like-minded people. Do you think that in steering science fiction, and fiction like that, that it was you know, they were making attempts to steer science fiction in a way that would what be predictive programming to some degree, or just to maximize profits in that kind of,
It wasn't to maximize profit. They were trying
no,
to steer people's beliefs
mm,
ultimately towards theosophy and futurism. If you really want to
more
dig
of
deep,
like a new age
yeah, very much
type
so. I
of,
mean, Bar Marx
okay,
Hubbard, like
right,
her father Louis Marx owned the Marx Toy Company. I mean, they were loaded.
right,
So I mean, he funded the Bush family. Most people have heard of Brown and Harriman, but
yeah,
Marx funded the Bushes more. You know,
Yeah.
but no, people just want to discount Barbara Marx Hubbard as some sort of kook because when you listen to her, she sounds straight up new, like a new age kook. But the woman's talking about that we're the leader, the
Yeah, but
pale horse riders of death, and they're going to kill 1/4 of the population.
yeah, but all that new age kook stuff that seemed like new age kook stuff just a couple of decades ago. I mean, we're watching it become
Hmm.
it's just mainstream thought now, a lot of it. I mean, even the people that you would never believe. I mean, it's infiltrated, the church, it's infiltrated
Which Alice Bailey said it
everywhere.
would
Yeah.
with world servers and stuff like that. I mean, you have the world servers that I used to be a former theosophist. You have the world servers that aren't members of the Theosophical Society, kind of like free zoners in Scientology, right? That
Yeah.
go and spread theosophy and go and spread New Age and lead people away from Jesus, or get them to question Jesus. You see that happening, like you had people like me where I was quote unquote well-meaning, but I was doing evil on behest of the Theosophical Society. That was one of the things that broke me out of realizing, because that I thought once I realized that I held the religion of the elite, I was like, wait a minute. I thought I was fighting against the elite.
Yeah, wait. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. And a lot of people that might be tough to hear, but especially when I did a lot of research into the purchasing and the translation and the propagation of the Nag Hammadi library scrolls and the Gnostic Gospels and everything, which I used to at
Yeah.
one time believe were true.
Right.
That's all funded by the Rockefellers. I mean, Lee Pagels is a
Hey.
multiple Rockefeller Award winner, so much so that Miguel Connor, when I questioned him on it, he didn't he didn't say no,
Yeah.
So I mean,
So is the New Age movement, and this might just be a silly, obvious question, but the New Age movement is just a rebranding of old time Gnosticism.
yes,
Okay.
1,000% yes.
Um, it's so funny that we're having this conversation. I just literally right before we did this, I recorded another episode with Robert Frederick, and he, of course, are you familiar with him? He
No,
has
not
the
offhand.
He has the Hidden Life is Best. You should check him out. I think you'd find him interesting. Really smart guy digging into some of the hidden history stuff involved with Bacon and Shakespeare and his kind of entire thesis is that he believes what I believe and that's Bacon was a at least the overseer, if not much more hands-on in the creation of the Shakespearean canon. And it was to push and kind of his discovery, or he goes through the Shakespeare plays line by line, um, and pulls out the Gnostic kind of tenets from
Hmm.
all of them. And I mean, I wish I could quote you word for word what he
I
just.
wouldn't disagree.
It's pretty incredible the stuff that he's found, and it overlaps. The reason I found him is it overlaps with my research because my research starts the linchpin of my research is Francis Bacon forward to present day, and then Francis Bacon and the Stuart dynasty back into history and where they came from. And the interesting thing is that if you follow the male line, um, from the Stuarts back in time, it's all broken and discombobulated. But if you follow the female line, which you're talking about a veneration of the feminine on that in that world view of theirs. So it makes sense that the female line would be more significant if you follow that back. I mean, it's just stepping stones from the Stuarts to the Plantagenet to the Carolinian to the Merovingian, and then you start getting into the old hat Dan Brown stuff,
Exactly.
which I think was obfuscated purposely. You know what I mean? I think that there's some there as far as those bloodlines go. I mean, clearly, I don't believe that anybody was. I don't believe any of those dynasties were from the bloodline of Christ.
No, I don't
But
either.
I
I
do
one time did. I don't anymore.
I
No.
do believe that they used it. I believe maybe they might actually believe that their
They used it
bloodline.
as a mythos to build themselves up.
There you go. That's what I always say. It's to imbue their dynasty, their rule with importance that may not have been there. Now, when you look at where the Merovingians came from and the the tribes, the nomadic tribes that came out of the Levant and ended up um intermarrying with the Frankish, Gaulish tribes and whatnot, there's some there's some there. It's just it's those lineages aren't as clear as from the Merovingians forward because I mean those are all royals, so their family trees are are so public. Um,
Well, with Dan Brown for a minute, I mean, who was the heroes for the lost symbol?
I watched that and I think I read it, but I'm assuming it's the Gnostic side of things
It's the
because that's Dan,
Freemasons.
yeah, because that's Dan Brown's thing, and that was what me and Robert were talking about is I've I've found some pretty undeniable evidence that not only that Jacobitism didn't kind of end in
No, it
1746,
didn't at
and
all.
I think that America kind of ended up being almost a breakaway civilization for the Stuarts. And instead of ruling as the monarchs that they were, even though if you follow their line back from the Stuarts back to the Plantagenets, back to the Carolinians, and then to the Merovingians, and then whatever they came from before, the those rules were relatively um, they were long in some senses, but they were always tumultuous. I mean, the Merovingians were one of the most deposed and kind of dynasties that there was. And then the Stuarts on the other end of it kind of were the same thing. And it's people who listen to this podcast, they know my overarching thesis is that the Stuarts kind of saw the writing on the wall and knew that they were going to have to shift at some point into something that wasn't monarchy. And I
I'm
think you
not a
see
fan of the Jacobins, by the way.
the Jacobites,
Well, the
yeah,
Jacobins,
yeah,
they killed my ancestor.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
So,
my Guy de Brisson was first cousin to Marquis de Lafayette. That's why I live in Fayetteville.
oh, the Marquis. I could take you to the place where you might be able to find his signature right here in the town that I live in, man. He sat up on the hill and lobbed cannon fire into the mansion of the great grandson of Pocahontas for like a month. Anyway, um, forgot where I was going, but my point was that I believe the Stuarts were of a Gnostic line. I think
Agree.
that's why you don't really see. I've had people push back on that and say, no, no, they were uber Catholic. And I'm like, well, Mary Queen of Scots was, but look at her son. He wasn't. And then look at the subsequent kings and queens of the Stuart line. They went back and forth. You'd have a Catholic one, then you'd have a Protestant
Mhm.
one, then you'd have a Protestant one who put up with Catholics, and then you'd have a Protestant one who hated Catholics, and then it would go back and forth. And I really, I think it all galvanizes into Freemasonry. I mean, you really imbue that entire family history of the Stuarts back to the Merovingians within and what came before that within the rites and rituals of Freemasonry. And
Now
then
I would now I
yeah.
would the only thing that I would put out is I do believe that King James was, through all my research of him, seemed to be kind of a breakout from the rest of his family.
So from what I've read about King James, he he had a strange upbringing,
He did, yes.
with his mom being in prison.
That's true.
One thing that's really interesting is the jailer of his mom was the same guy who took Francis Bacon all over Europe. He was the ambassador to France, and so when Bacon went around, one of the very few times that Bacon actually left England was when he was in his teenage years and he took his tour of Europe. That the same guy, I think his name was Amias Paulet. He ends up being Mary Queen of Scots jailer. He's supposedly the one that discovered her plot to try to have, while she was in jail, to try to have Queen Elizabeth assassinated, which may or may not have been some bullshit trumped up
Yeah.
charges so that they could cut her head off. But then that same family, like just a couple, like a grandson or grandson down from that Paulet, is the illegitimate father of a guy named Francis Nicholson, the guy who laid out Williamsburg and Annapolis, and who also was the governor of Virginia,
Which
South
is a
Carolina.
Catholic state. Maryland was one of the only
Hmm.
Catholic states of, as
Yeah.
far as its formation of the Union,
Well, if you look at
which is hence
William
Maryland, Mary, right?
Maryland,
Mary
yeah.
worship.
Well, and you
So,
look at Virginia, it's named supposedly for the Virgin Queen,
correct.
but I think there was a much more Catholic influence there. When you look at, you might find this interesting. I don't know, this is part of my research, but when you look at where Williamsburg sits, kind of the birthplace of this country, um, that particular, um, well, where the campus of William and Mary sits, which is the absolute base of my research, because I believe William and Mary is a gigantic. It's more imbued with the symbolism of Freemasonry than any overlay of DC you could ever look at. It is jumping off of the map. It's embarrassingly obvious once people look at it at what they put there. But um, there was actually very few people know, but there was actually a Jesuit mission in right exactly where the campus of William and Mary sits in the 1580s.
Hmm.
And that was a nobody really knows why. They have some stories about how the English were possibly pushing west with Raleigh's um, Roanoke colony and whatnot. And so they sent up some Jesuits from Florida, but they go all the way through the whole South and stop right in what became Williamsburg, Virginia. And then when they come over in 1607, the kind of commander of that mission was a guy named Sir Gabriel Archer. Sir Gabriel Archer's parents were the people paying I forgot what it was called, but you'd have to pay the crown money if you refused to go to the Anglican church during the Elizabethan era. Anyway, he was a crypto Catholic. They found his grave in 2010 underneath the chapel at the Jamestown Fort, and he was buried with a reliquary on his
Hmm.
chest, um, containing holy water and bone and whatnot. So this guy was the leader of that kind of mission to come over here, and he was a crypto Catholic in a time where, you know, it was you might get hung for being a Catholic
Hmm.
at that time. And not only was he a Catholic, but everybody that was there knew he was a Catholic because they buried him with Catholic honors. And he just so happened to kind of force them to shove this new colony, which didn't have a specific place in mind when they left England. They knew they were going to come up the Chesapeake near where the Roanoke colony was, and they shoved it right where a Jesuit mission had been. And then again, Francis Nicholson, later on, he becomes the governor of Virginia and Maryland and, funny enough, Nova Scotia. It's all connected. I'm sorry. I'll
It's
get
okay.
going on my crap, but yeah, you were looking up something that was way off of where I just ended up.
No, yeah, you had me listening. I was listening. A lot of people don't realize, that Maryland, because I don't believe America was a Catholic nation, but Maryland itself was, it was a Catholic state.
I don't
You
think
know.
so either, but I actually think that there was something to be said for the Gnostic ideals. And I think the Gnostic ideals and the veneration of the feminine within Catholicism made Catholicism an excellent place for Gnostics and Gnostic ideals to kind of hide.
Agreed.
Um, and I think because of that, when you couple the fact that Francis Bacon was the head of the Virginia Company of London, who sent the mission over here in 1607, and his distilling of Rosicrucianism and all the kind of Gnostic mysteries into his own stuff. And then he's part of this thing along with this new Stuart King, and all of a sudden they're putting settlements where Jesuit missions were. I think that there's some interplay between the Catholics and secret Gnostics of the time. I think they specifically came over here for something. Um, I don't think it was just a we need to grow tobacco and go meet the Indians kind of that they play it off to be now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would also I to your point, it seems that Nick Fuentes is trying to push that we're a Catholic nation.
Everybody is these days.
Correct, yeah.
There's a big Catholic kind of revival going on right now. My kids go to Catholic school. We're not Catholic. It's just we're in a rough town, and you know, I grew up around Catholics. But it does they do seem to be pushing a sort of Catholic revival that I'm not really seeing a whole ton of evidence of unless you're listening to
Correct. It's like
certain
the
media personalities.
It's like the Orthobro revival that's not really hitting.
Right. And I got to be honest with you, listening to podcasts and stuff and being a Christian myself and being pretty fed up with the evangelical Christian church that I grew up in, because of its foibles and idiosyncrasies. And I think you have that in all denominations. I definitely, for a short period of time was, talking to my mom and going, "Hey, man, look into some." She's my spiritual advisor because my mom is a Bible reading,
Hmm.
um, look into orthodoxy and yeah, do these guys really have it as, kind of their shit together as much as like they kind of put forward that they do? I mean, they have a real strong way of being being kind of condescending in a way that made me, um go, I don't know, maybe I should, you know, look into this a little bit more.
Yeah, they also have kind of their own Gnostic doctrine of theosis, right?
Yeah,
Uniting
yeah,
with God, and you have hesychasm, the repetitive chanting which Jesus warns about,
right.
in form of prayer and stuff like that. So, it doesn't surprise me that you're kind of seeing you're seeing a rise of Gnosticism, you're seeing a rise of Judaizing, you're seeing a rise of New Age beliefs, you're seeing all these rises of things that were, you know, been issues to the church, throughout history. And I have issues with evangelical churches, but I will say that I'm actually going to do a stream next few weeks in defense of evangelicals themselves
Yeah.
because they're getting crapped on by almost everyone.
It's guilty by association for the most part, from what I can see. It's
Yes.
lumping evangelicals in with your prosperity gospel people. I mean, because the prosperity gospel people and this kind of mega church culture that's happening, there's really eh, the closest looking thing to them are the evangelicals that you know what I mean? You can't lump them in with the Orthodox. You can't lump them in with the Catholics because they look
Well,
so,
does your
so
average
different.
dispy know about really know about the sordid history of Schofield? They don't,
No,
but
No.
but majority of your dispies, majority of your evangelicals, they are, if you look at the statistics, they are some of the most charitable people in America.
Yeah.
I mean, but they're constantly getting malaligned, and you're seeing the rise, the push of Catholicism and Christian nationalism
You
and
think
and
some of that
orthodoxy.
you think some of that maligning might have to do with the the way just these evil political bastards jump on the evangelical bandwagon to push votes? You know what I mean?
I mean, the Council for National Policy has done that forever and a day.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm no fan. Obviously, I think Paula White, I pray for her that she gets saved. I think she's, a false teacher, false prophet.
she's
She's
crazy, is what
probably
she is, bro.
demonically possessed,
She
insane at the
is
same
out
time.
of her mind, man.
But I mean, it's people like her that when they think of when a person thinks of evangelical and they're not a Christian,
Yeah.
they think of the worst of the worst, right? They think of Kenneth Copeland, they think of
Right,
Paula
right, right.
White, but they don't think
Benny
about
Hinn.
but they don't think about the average born again evangelical Christian that tries to live by the laws of Christ. Gives their money. Sometimes they should not be giving those money to those churches, but a lot of them give money to people and organizations, people directly or organizations that that they're trying to do good for, right? And so,
Right.
I'm just seeing more and more of them being attacked as time goes on, of people just, I mean, you see it, you go online. And I know the algorithms and the AI, like online, like social media is a cesspool. All right. Like that's why
Yeah.
I left Twitter. It's been about a year, a little more than a year, because
Yeah.
it's not that I don't go on there and see the news from time to time and see what people are saying, but I'm not going to post any significance
Yeah.
and I'm not going to feed it anymore. It's disgusting, and I'm definitely not going to go to True Social. I mean, I think Trump's likely the Antichrist, so if he is, I mean, casting truth to the ground, I
Yeah.
mean, True
Can I
Socials.
ask you,
Yes, of course.
a minute ago you mentioned the rise of the new age and Gnosticism and Catholicism, and I don't want to completely paint all Catholics
No, I
into
believe
like
they're.
the negative. I mean,
I believe they're born again Catholics. I think they're rarer, but I do think they do
yeah,
exist. That don't
yeah,
understand the teachings of the Catholic Church. I think if you hold the co-redemptrix, this is the last thing I'll say this. If you hold the
yeah,
co-mediatrix, quote unquote theology that Mary and Jesus saved you when the Bible is clear that
right,
Jesus is the only mediator between man and God, then I
right.
don't think you're saved. I'm sorry, I just flat out don't.
Yeah,
Just don't.
yeah, that's where the line gets drawn with me as well. Um, but I'm wondering, I don't know where you stand as far as, end times prophecy and how close things could be or how
Mm,
far away or whatever, but you do see this rise of what seems to be opposing movements,
mm-hmm.
but they seem to here lately in the last few decades, they maybe last 100 years, as Gnosticism, New Age, and different things are on the rise. They have some overlap.
They do.
Do you
They do.
see any? Do you can you? I see that. I'll just say what I see. I see that, and I go, well, that seems like a pretty great um start to the one world religion.
Yes.
And you start to see these caveats being made, you know, seemingly against, historical doctrine, that kind of opens up the door for this thing over here to kind of slide a little bit into this and I'm okay, you're okay,
No, I definitely agree
kind of
with you on that.
situation.
I understand what you're saying. I believe the one world religion will be the worship of the Antichrist. I think it's what Scripture says is going to
Hmm.
be. And that's what the world unites around, is believing the Antichrist is the Messiah. Which, with
Right.
the Antichrist, if there is a third temple, which I believe there will be, but I could be mistaken. But if there is, the Antichrist going into being the abomination of desolation, going into the abominable third temple that God did not decree, right? And
Right.
going in there and saying, I am God, could just be him saying, I am the Messiah. Or as Trump said, I am the chosen one, it could just be as simple as that, you know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do, everything is converging. Like, for example, a lot of people like to talk about dispensationalists and pre-tribulational rapture believers, which I'm neither, and they like to say it's their fault with what's going on in Israel with Bibi Netanyahu and all that
Mm.
other stuff. But then again, they're not looking. Well, Pete Hegseth, for example, is no longer a dispy. At one time, he was for the building of the third temple. He gave that speech or whatever. But now he's a post-millennialist. He's a Christian nationalist post-millennialist, which is a completely different eschatology. Okay, he
Right.
wants to crusade and take back Israel and Jerusalem ultimately to give it back to Jesus. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, John, he's not really saying that. But when he's sitting under Doug Wilson and he is saying he is a post millennialist now, at least for the churches that he's going to and the pastors that he's sitting under, then that with his Templar tattoo, that's
Yeah.
what they believe. Okay. So, but that's converging with, again, what a lot of people don't want to talk about is Eastern Orthodoxy eschatology as well. That one now, not every Eastern Orthodox person believes this. You have Greek Eastern Orthodoxy and you have Russian Eastern Orthodoxy. All right. I'm
Right.
speaking primarily about Russian Eastern Orthodoxy. Okay.
Okay.
Now, what they believe is not all of them, but some of them consider themselves the old ones, like Alexander Dugin, okay, which is a straight up Luciferian,
Right.
Crowleyist. All right. He says, and what I'm hearing, and it seems to be what's coming out of Putin's, mouth. It seems to be what's coming out of, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, what he wrote. All this seems to be converging into, we're going to go save the world from Bibi Netanyahu, who's the Antichrist, and we're going to go liberate Israel and Jerusalem for Eastern Orthodox Church, which Jay Dyer would be behind this. All right. And while we're doing that, we're going to finally liberate and establish, our church back in Constantinople. That's what Alexander
Right.
Dugin's saying, but nobody over here is talking about that. Instead, they're like dispensationalism, and look, again, I have issues with dispensationalism. I have issues with Hagee and Paula White to the nth degree, okay? But everybody's focusing on that and focus on what's going on in Israel and Iran right now. And I understand that that's important, but they're not looking at the further greater step or the bigger picture, is that we literally have post-millennialist Templars in control, Calvinists, okay, and
Right.
in America. All right. And on the side of that, we have Russia with their own orthodoxy beliefs, with Dugin and Putin that nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to touch. And I understand that a lot of Russian Orthodox are all millennialists. They don't look at it like Dugin does, okay? And they don't look at like everybody in the Russian Orthodox Church does. I understand that. But all these things are converging. When you have, I believe Gog is both the leader of North Korea currently, which is Kim Jong-un, and North Korea as well, because the Kingdom of Korea used to be called Goguryeo. Okay. And so you had Goguryeo, which was North Korea, and South Korea was broken up into two kingdoms. I don't remember which one of them was, but the other was named Cilia. Okay. Which is a
Okay.
whole other discussion. I'll get there in a minute. The Cilia kingdom's
Come
crazy.
on. You can
When
go
they
on this all night, dude.
when they had Trump go over there, and for the first time, there was, I forgot the king that united the three kingdoms in Korea, just like you had the three kingdoms in China. We all played the Dynasty Warriors games if you used to play video games back
Right. Right. Right.
during millennials and stuff, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, all right, and everything like that. But Korea had their own tale, okay? So in the king that united Goguryeo and Cilia, and I forgot the third kingdom, he has a tomb called it was called like the Holy Horse or the White Horse Tomb. And in that tomb, he has a crown, and the crown looks like it's like a snake with three like castle, like what do you call that? Like towers above it, right? Like it's like a serpentine crown, right?
Yeah.
Well, the prime minister of South Korea has Trump over there, and he goes, "Okay, you're the first person ever. We're literally giving you a replica of that king that united Korea, who was the savior of the Korean people. We're going to give you his crown, his snake-like serpentine crown. But inside that white horse tomb is a picture of the king and the coming reincarnation of the king riding a white horse. Now that's the first horseman of the apocalypse, which is the Antichrist in Revelation.
Is this all accelerationism? Is this all an effort, whether known or not, to, I mean, we all know that, you know, we won't know the hour or the time, but
We'll
like,
know the season.
right. Is is this what this is? I mean, that's not the first crown that he's been given either, right?
No, he got the crown from Habad from the Israel Heritage Foundation, which is separate from the American Heritage Foundation,
Right.
Habad Lubavitch, where they literally gave him the Prince of Peace, which is the title for
Right.
Jesus, the Mashiach crown. Yes.
I mean, is that what this is? I mean, there can't be there can't be this many coincidences. Like, say I'm not a Christian at all. I don't believe any of this at all, and nothing's going to happen from this. It doesn't mean that the obviously in the conspiracy world we always say doesn't matter what you believe. We're talking about what these people believe. You know what I mean? I I can't see a guy get a crown from Israel and the crown like you're talking about that I'm just now ever hearing about and not think that there's something to it. And this idea of accelerationism of pushing for the big war, you know what I mean? This big end times.
But the thing is I don't think they can force God's hand. So, for example,
I don't think they can either.
When Julian
But
the
do you think that's
Apostate,
what their mindset is? I mean,
well,
because you do have, I mean, you've got Satanists who believe that um, they'll be part of, Satan's army, and I mean, they've got a completely different
yeah, but you have
view
the
of how
NAR who believes
things.
they're going to be part of Joel's army, and they're going to kill Christians that choose not to be a part of it. I mean, that's the thing,
Fucking
brother.
crazy,
I
man.
mean, like again, could it go for another 50 or 100 years? Yes, it could. It could. And could just like Julian Apostate when he tried to rebuild the third temple after Constantine,
Right.
and God destroyed it, could this third temple be destroyed and never be built into fruition? Could, right? But when
Uh-huh.
you have all of these things converging at one time, when you have North Korea fighting in Ukraine, when you have Kim Jong Un saying, I'm giving weapons and stuff to Iran, when it looks like you're going to have um, Russia and North Korea, just like the Bible says, if they are Gog and Magog, come down to Mount Hermon, which you should know about Mount Hermon,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And be destroyed there. Okay, like again, putting Syria, like Damascus being inhabited, are they going to try to put Bashar al-Assad back in power? Are they going to go down to defend Iran and then try to retake Syria because Russia parapolitically needs another way to get to the Mediterranean Sea?
Yeah. Dude, the more the more I push end times stuff out of my head, the like for every like thought that I have that's like, nah, come on, man. 20 things come across the news where I'm like, okay, all right, I'm back.
I mean, it's the same with me. Like, do I think Trump's the Antichrist? Yes. Do I know for sure? No, he could be the forerunner to the Antichrist, which isn't necessarily in scripture. That's more of a theosophical mindset of what they might push. The stage of the forerunner, right? And so I
Right.
believe the forerunner is actually Nayib Bukele, and El Salvador is kind of the forerunner to that, right? But like is Trump the false, like is there a false apocalypse to the actual where everybody's like, what if they paint Bibi Netanyahu as the Antichrist? Because the harlot, not to get too off in the weeds, but the harlot scripturally rides the beast, it controls the beast, but the beast hates the harlot. The Antichrist wants to kill the harlot. All right. Now, I believe that Mystery
Right.
Babylon is Jerusalem. You got three cities it could be. Okay. That are surrounded by seven literal hills. Okay. You either have Jerusalem, you have Rome, or you have New York City. Okay. And I would say that the New York City, America being Mystery Babylon is the newest representation that came from Tim LaHaye and Left Behind and the CMP. I
Right.
don't believe it to be true. Rome comes out of Protestant historicism. I don't believe it to be true either. I think scripturally is Jerusalem. And I think if the Antichrist is Trump, he's being blackmailed by the current world order, which is a Jesuit, Freemason, Zionist world order, among other factions as well, too, headquartered in Jerusalem, with, headquarters in London as well, too. You could say the Vatican, London, and even in Theosophy. Alice Bailey says that Freemasonry, Jesuitism and Zionism were all useful tools that will be done away with by the Maitreya and the Great White Lodge in the New World Order. Like, what am I supposed to say to that?
Yeah. Good God.
I mean, has Freemasonry not been exposed to the false Great Awakening? Are they dwindling in power? Are they dwindling in people joining Freemason lodges? Like it's crazy to me that once you're reading that from Alice Bailey, and you're seeing it happen, you're like, well, what am I supposed to say about it?
Yeah. Dang, I knew this episode was going to be fired. um,
I mean, I don't know what to say, man. Like when she's literally saying that Freemasonry is a tool of the Theosophists, a tool of the Great White Lodge, and it will run its use, and I'm paraphrasing, it'll
yeah.
run its usefulness, but they're not really the true adepts, but we're the true adepts, right? And you
Right.
see Theosophy being pushed by everything. Media, by the arts, by music. I mean, go listen to Muse and Knights of Sidonia. Like I used to love
Yeah.
Muse. They're pushing the False Great
Yeah.
Awakening. Go listen to Uprising. It's everywhere. It's in our faces. And you have the controlled noticing where Israel's being exposed. If Israel is the true power, if the Zionists or the Jews are the true power, right? Then why is there so much exposure going on?
Right.
They can't just contain the lid of it. They've contained the lid of it for so long, but now all of a sudden they can't.
So your so your idea is that there's all this focus on Israel and the perceived evil that Israel's doing.
And Israel
Me,
is doing evil.
well, yeah, for sure. For sure, because BB is a turd in my book, but
But your average Jew isn't. You know
oh
that.
no, for sure
But
not.
but they're gonna get
Do you
scapegoated.
do you put any stock into this kind of idea that the true Hebrew people are few and far between as far as
You talk
that
about the
country goes?
Khazar theory?
So between that and just between the dispersion of the Hebrew
The
people all through,
dysphoria?
yeah,
Diaspora?
just all throughout history has kind of muddied the I don't know I don't want to sound too um but just that
These are things that I've
there
thought
are
about for a long time. I know what you're saying. So
that there
like,
are Jewish people and there
mhm.
are people of the Jewish faith, but that Israel has, for lack of a better explanation, just been watered down by a invading force that from what I can tell doesn't really hold a lot of the tenets of Judaism. I mean, you look back just to the from the destruction of the second
Mhm.
temple and this adoption of Babylonian Kabbalism that early on into I mean, I've had I've had a messianic like Jewish rabbi not really but kind of defend Kabbalah to me. And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he was like, well, you got to understand, it came out of a time of desperation for, and I'm like, but it's Kabbalah.
But it's Kabbalah.
Have
I
you
mean,
read it? Do you know how dark it is? Like, and he knew
do
all about it. I mean, he
and all it
knew,
is another can of paint of Gnosticism because
right.
the spark of life, within
It's,
with the
it's
spark
an
of
inversion of what the other part of what you say you believe is.
I know.
They're diametrically opposed. I was literally talking to Robert Frederick about this, and I was
I would
kind
have
of
been the same thing, man. I would have been like, "Whoa, whoa, what?" Like,
it'd be like, I look at Kabbalism being kind of this just accepted thing within Judaism
yeah.
nowadays, is almost as if, you know, evangelical Christians all got together in some big council and we're like, you know what? We're also gonna start bringing in a couple tenets of voodoo. All right, and we're gonna hold those like side by side. I'm like, yeah, we know they're a little weird, not
But they did
technically.
that with but they did that with New Thought, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
evangelicals did that with New. You could say Catholicism did
A
that in
little
some parts
more.
of the world with voodoo.
I mean, a little more. I want to say veiled, but I think they've done such a good job with like just mashing Kabbalah into Jewish culture and then kind of shouting you down if you raise any suspicion about Kabbalah. So most people, they're like, yeah, it's like when it's when the celebrities in LA start being Jewish, they get the little red band around their arm and they start practicing a form of Judaism. And it's like, well, that's not really what Kabbalah is. It just happens to be a dark religion that ended up, you know, s- coming about within a people who happen to have come from, you know what I mean?
Now, I know what you mean. Yeah,
Like
I know.
it's such a weird, it's such a, I don't even know how I got onto Kabbalah, but we were talking about kind of the watering down of the Jewish people, and I think there's something to that.
But it was even happening before Jesus's time.
Well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you can go pick up some of the books that I don't consider to be part of the Bible. I mean, the Jews don't even have it in their in their collective book, but like kind of like the intertestamental apocrypha, the wisdom of Solomon has fatalism in it, the
yeah,
fatalistic determinism in it, which is a Gnostic mindset that everything is fate and everything has been determined.
right.
Which is why I believe Calvinism.
Calvinism.
I have issues with
That's what I
Calvinism.
said. Our earliest founding fathers, these deist Calvinists, were Kabbalists. And you look at where they came from and who sent them over here, Bacon and his ilk and the
Well, Augustine
Rosicrucians.
was a Manichaean.
Yeah, it's the more and more I learn about it, the more clear that I think this country was built as a Gnostic.
Was Freemasonry the scapegoat? I'm not saying Freemasonry is a good thing, but was Freemasonry, especially in the conspiracy circles, a scapegoat?
I think that it was much more important in pushing real Gnostic ideals early on, and then um it is like everything. It runs its course, and then it dwindles. I mean, dude, look, I've done several talks at a one of the oldest lodges in Virginia. Been introduced as, hey, listen to this guy. He knows more about our history than most of us do. Because I say 90% of Freemasons are fish fry Masons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. They
They,
just show up for camaraderie and
yeah,
slam a couple of beers back.
yeah. It's not. Yeah, and I think it's like anything. Any kind of movement. Your elites at the top are going to use it for what they're going to use it for, and they're going to keep everybody else happy by throwing them, a couple scraps. Like, oh, you can be part of this too. We're not doing anything up here. Don't look too hard. You're a brother as well.
And Freemasonry is a major problem. I'm not trying to say that it isn't by my saying it's a scapegoat. I'm just saying in conspiracism, which again, you could say Alice Bailey's the OG modern conspiracy theorist, right? Or
Yeah,
the propagation of that. Again, look at the evils of Freemasonry, don't look at Theosophy. And
right.
Theosophy and Gnosticism being, like again,
It's just rebranded. It rebranded from the masonry of the 17 and 1800s into the theosophy of what,
the true, yeah.
1800s? They pulled it out of there
Late
and said, well,
1800s,
they're
early 1900s.
well, I mean, and look at what you have in the 1820s with the Morgan affair. I
Yeah.
mean, you have masonry go from, I mean, they were talking like 300 lodges in like every state or colony, or I guess they were states at that point, down to, I mean, I think they said like Vermont and two other states, they can't find records of any for a like 10-year period. And there were some states up in the Northeast and whatnot that had like three lodges. And then that's when you get like all these Knights of Pythias and these different like sects and whatnot, where they're just mashing Freemasonry into something else. So
Well,
that
just like Jesuits being fractured, as Knights of Malta being fractions. You have
yeah,
the Protestant Knights of Malta down there in Florida that got sued by the real Knights of Malta, and then the real Knights of Malta lost. So I mean,
right.
they have all these fracturing and splinter groups.
You ask if I think that they're the scapegoat. I think that they were the easiest thing to throw under the bus modern day to take your eye off of it. I don't know if they realized how much people would identify or not identify with Masons, but become interested in it because it's so accessible and
Yeah, yeah.
information about it is so accessible that this Dan Brown thing came out, this kind of throwing under the bus of masonry, right? But then in doing that, you open up all this interest for nerds like me and you to start digging in, and they were smart to rebrand into Theosophy and New Age because it's a little more ethereal and a little less concrete, harder to like pin down to one thing.
Because you're not doing
Whereas,
actual rituals.
right, whereas with Masonry, you've got a couple hundred years, couple few hundred years of solid, you got books. I got Morals and Dogma on you can't read through that book, which 99% of Masons don't read through that book. You can't read through that book and get to the end of it and go, oh, yeah. You either have to compromise what you came in with or you have to walk away.
Well, Albert Pike was a horrible guy. I mean,
He's a shithead.
he was going around, committing adultery. That's why he was running out of towns, right?
Yeah.
Because too many men would get fed up with that.
I mean,
And
every other chapter you have Pike saying Kabbalah is the source, that's where it all comes from,
hmm
right? Or his references to Lucifer. I mean, it is very hard.
Same with
E-
Thomas Paine's references to Lucifer.
right, early on. And so I think, yes, they were a scapegoat. Um,
And we're
and
not
I
saying
don't,
scapegoat that they were not like completely like we both have major problems with Freemasonry. All right.
I think that they had run I think Masonry proper had run its course of what it needed to accomplish and really, I think,
That's why it became blamed for being the ultimate evil. You could say during because of expediency, right? It was necessary to do
yeah,
so.
yeah, you could see them on every corner. There it is. They're bad. You know what I mean? But the crazy thing is they left a library of information about it,
Yeah.
which made it a lot easier for people like you and me to tie it to the Gnostics and
Which is
Theosophists
why
and whatnot.
Theosophy said they run their just like the Zionists have run their course and they're
Yeah.
being exposed, right?
But
And the
and it
cap
only takes it only takes I mean we all know it only takes, a generation before everybody forgets. So we may be, exposing the similarities and the sort of the rebranding from masonry into theosophy.
Mhm.
Um but who knows in another, 50 years if that'll all be washed out. And theosophy will kind of be the new normal, in the way the new age is going and
But
whatnot.
I don't know if we're gonna be like, I don't know if
Here,
we've entered into the 7 year tribulation by then. Like
right?
it could
Yeah,
be.
but and I think that's important to state too is that this is all coming to a head, and what do they say about the best laid plans?
Mhm.
I mean, and this kind of accelerationism idea of um pushing towards the end times to get
Well,
some.
we'll go back to Dan Brown and go back to Lost Symbol. Do you remember the Institute of Noetic Sciences that was mentioned in
Yeah,
Lost Symbol?
yeah.
I later on, I did a lot of research about the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and to talk about. So they were funded a lot by Council for National Policy and Family and Fellowship. You had Paul Nathaniel Temple, the Temple. That you used to hear and you had Paul Nathaniel Temple, and you had who was the other? It was Paul Nathaniel Temple, and there was yeah, Sir John Templeton. So I used to watch the McLaughlin Group on PBS with my grandfather when I was growing up, and he would say funding provided by the Templeton Group, and I was like,
Right,
"Who's the Templeton Group?" You know. But you have literally these conservatives, so-called, and Christians, so-called, funding a Gnostic, New Age,
right.
pseudoscientific center that was known as the good guys in Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol, with the Freemasons.
Right. Have you this is kind of a left turn, not really, but along these same lines, have you looked into the I read a book not long ago, and it was, I wish I could remember the name of this book. It's sitting in the other room. And I want to reread it again because I think it's pertinent, but it's a guy who goes in to basically and breaks down the history of all the different translations of the Bible.
I mean, I've read scholarly work to that,
Right.
yes.
So you know that a lot of like the NIV and things like that, like his big thing was the King James is like the only trusted one that people use now. Obviously, the further you go back, and honestly, I with Bacon's involvement in.
Now, I would argue his involvement with the King James Bible was limited.
I don't know. Yeah, but you're talking about Francis Bacon.
Correct,
And if
yes.
that guy has a hand in anything, there's crap in there that should. My only thing is like this is not the infallible,
I
I
think
think a lot.
I'm not a King James only in this
Right.
onlyist. I like the King James, but I'm not a King
Right.
James onlyist.
From what's out there to choose from, like readily available if you don't want to
I mean,
learn.
I circle through the New American Standard Bible. I circle through the New King James.
Yeah.
I like the King James,
So,
the difference between the Masoretic and the Septuagint, right? And
right.
the argument
And
of
the
those.
and literally the Egyptian I believe they refer to it as the Egyptian codices,
Hmm.
which is where a lot of the NIV like changes in translation came from, but that was a large cache of what they found out were Gnostic.
Yeah, I have an issue with the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Right.
which I mean, the Essenes were, all intents and purposes, Gnostic Jews.
Right, which is a bummer because the Essenes have been branded recently as like these like hippie Jews who were
They're
like,
just Gnostics.
yeah,
I used to look to the Essenes as my spiritual fathers as a Gnostic, because
yeah. I
Dan
see.
Brown larped the Essenes.
I only have heard like in the last few years about this evidence that they were just straight up Gnostic.
They were
When I
aesthetic.
thought that this whole time that the Essenes were like where John the Baptist came from,
Yep.
and that they were like this group of like hippie Jews who broke away from
And
the
they were aesthetics and
corrupt
full of aesthetic
establishment. Yeah. And they
purification
were just out
rituals.
there scribing, just
Yep.
getting everything recorded. And turns out, no, they were out there reversing
Yeah, they
everything.
were out there being Gnostics. They were out there, like you had the Zealots, which are a modern day Christian nationalists, if we're gonna,
Right.
paint the same picture, right? And you had the Pharisees, which are the modern day church
I will
higher
say
up.
I will say I identify with the zealots at least a little bit more. I feel like at least they were like hardcore believers, whether or not that was funneled into
True, fair,
horrible,
fair. But they
pretty
weren't. But they
gnarly.
did have the spirit of rebellion, which is the spirit of America, which
I
is not a
liked
good
it.
thing.
I liked it. Well, I liked that they were out shanking people because they didn't want, they were tired of whatever. I'm sure somebody at the leadership of the Zealots was probably pretty corrupt, but I will say
They
you hear
say
about,
Judas Iscariot, you know,
yeah,
but I don't remember which apostle directly was. You
yeah, it
remember?
was, let me see. It wasn't Peter.
It
It
was Simon,
wasn't
Simon the
Simon.
Zealot.
Simon the Zealot, the big boy. Well, I don't know if he was actually big, but in the new Jesus TV show, he's a big guy.
The Chosen, the Counts for National
Yeah.
Pol. You have Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins right left behind, right? And then
Right.
Dallas Jenkins writes The Chosen. And who does Dallas Jenkins for every episode consult with? A rabbi, a Catholic priest, and a non-denominational pastor.
Really?
That's what's out of his own mouth.
Yeah. Well,
As Christians, why would we go to a Jewish rabbi for anything?
I could see,
I can understand maybe for if you maybe if you're
historical accuracy, especially when
well,
you're dealing
yes, but they are
with
still partially
that.
blinded though.
Yeah, I mean, if you're coming from straight from yeah. But then I feel like you're trying to brush up against, hey, my new Jesus show is going to be prophetic word of God and not just entertainment, which I think we all got to just go, hey, it was a pretty good depiction. You know what I mean? But other than that, you know,
Majority of it's
you
not literally from the Bible. Majority of it is just
right.
made up. Like
It's right. It's like looking at any, it's like looking at the Talmud in my opinion, Any of these you've got books out there written by Christian authors that Christians hold more dear to them than they do the Bible.
that's true. That's a
You know what I
problem.
mean? And I think we're all in danger of doing that with any piece of media that, and here I am sounding like some staunch Bible thumping, but
Is the
like
Bible not good enough on its own?
it is. I appreciate a television show
So do I.
because it gives me
The David show's pretty good. Have you
oh
seen that
yeah, it
one?
was pretty legit.
It's
Yeah.
pretty good. It's
They
pretty
got
good.
to cut. They got. My mom was unhappy with a few parts that she finds to be highly inaccurate, but I was like, all right. But they had giants.
It's still pretty good.
They had giants. I was pretty stoked about that.
Pretty
Somebody's
good.
talking about the giants. Yeah.
I'm not saying to
Um.
get your theology from it, but it's something to watch. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
I will say this. Christians are called to be at the forefront of all society, and for the majority of our life, well, for our lives, and we have been laughably behind in a lot of art mostly. You know what I mean? Like, when was the last time before 2015 that you could watch a Christian made anything TV
I
show?
would say
You know
that
what I mean?
I would say
It's been hard,
forefront. I would say not government mandated like the Seven Mountains mandate, which comes from theosophy, right?
right?
But Seven Spears. But I would say that Christians we should have our own media. We should have our
Yeah.
own
Yeah,
educational
it
systems
should
and stuff like that.
compete
Everything.
it should compete or surpass in quality.
Correct. Agreed.
And we have, I don't want to sound like some separationist either, but I do think in order for people to take you seriously, it's pretty important to really put the effort in it and not
Well,
make every
intellectualism has died for Christianity for 126
yeah.
odd years,
Doesn't it
give or
feel like we
take.
just gave in to the chanting of the same chorus of a praise song? Kind
Yeah,
of like the whole lifestyle just seems to be that very light and fluffy and just, yeah, and non-intellectual. I mean, of course, you've got great biblical scholars
of
and people
course.
out there.
I'm talking
but
about as a whole, though.
but as a whole, yeah, it does. It. This is, you know, uh, it's not appealing. The Christian religion, because I know, because I've gone back and forth growing up in the church and then going
Mm.
away from my faith, and then, conspiracy is kind of what brought me back and has kept me, helped keep me in the faith. Really seeing the evil that exists out there and the effort that evil goes to stay hidden and to recruit and to build.
Or to
It
appear as an angel of light.
has convinced me, um, of the existence of the good side. You know what I mean? There's no better. Um, well, I was gonna make a crappy analogy, but I won't. But it can be unappealing. The Christian religion, on TV.
But I think it's unappealing just because of the way that it's been. I mean, again, if we are entering into the times, the wheat from the terror separates, the love of many wax cold, as in the
Yeah,
days of Noah, but people forget also the days of Lot, you know?
yeah,
So, like that's why it's because, it's there's there's not many, like when Jesus said the labor was, the labor, there's a lot of, I'm paraphrasing, but there's a lot of labor, but the laborers are few, right?
yeah,
So now more than ever, and a lot of people don't know Christian apologetics. They don't know how to defend the faith.
yeah.
And
And that's the kind of stuff that I'm saying is so coming from my personal interests. Christianity can seem unappealing because it is a lot of what you find out there is very surface level. And it's just like, no, just have faith and shut up. Just come to church every Sunday and sing the same songs and pay your tithe and whatnot. And the ability to find a deeper, it's just it's such a commodity now. Christianity feels like such a commodity that it's so flooded with fluff and people who
But there
aren't.
are a lot of people returning to it if we are entering the
Yeah,
end of days. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a
yeah,
mass revival, but you have people who, because of the evil of the world, they're turning towards Jesus, and all glory to God because of that. I mean, I do
yeah,
agree that the intellectual, like, where do you go if you want intellectualism? Where do you go? A Calvinist church? Like, they're
right,
they're intellectual, but to a fault. They're teaching a faulty soteriology.
right,
So I mean, that's where a lot of people end up. They go to a Calvinist church, because they're looking for intellectualism that
right,
they're not going to find in the evangelical or Pentecostal church.
right. Yeah,
And again,
agreed.
everybody's different. Some people are more feelings, and other people, like you and I, are both intellectuals. So we have to
You
have.
are. I'm
No,
pseudo.
you're an intellectual too, brother. All right, so we have to have some, form of intellectual, like, stimulation, right? Now,
Yeah,
obviously, we could pick up the Bible, and that is enough, but most people don't even do that.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and that is one of the things too, is there's as much information and jumping off points for research in, reading a chapter, as you'll find in 10 books. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You can sit down and just try to burn through a chapter, and if you really dig into the etymology of words and translations and things like that, you can be there. You never need another. I mean, I love books and I love research and
Me
stuff like
too.
that, but my time would probably be spent a little better, putting as much effort as I do into the Stuart dynasty is digging into something
I'm
like the
trying to do
Bible.
that, man, just like Patrick
Yeah,
Henry said, right? Who may have been one of the only saved founding fathers. There may have been a few, obviously, that are lesser known, but that was one of his great regrets was not reading the Bible as much as he should have,
Yeah.
especially to his family as the father, as the head of the household. So I compared to Thomas Jefferson, who just
Well,
I don't
I
want the
was
deity of Jesus. I just want his ethos, but I'm not even going
when
to live by that
when
ethos.
you said Patrick Henry, the next words out of my mouth were, and you said one of the few that we know of.
Possibly,
Um,
possibly.
look at the guys that Jefferson completely turned on in his second term. Um, I think those are pretty good, pretty good examples. You're looking at John Adams, Patrick Henry. I don't
John
remember.
Adams was a universalist, though.
I know, but Universalist in how so
He was a
exactly?
Unitarian Universalist.
Well, he was. I mean, he professed. I mean, his whole life the Christian faith.
Yes, but when you do some deep diving into his
Don't
actual
tell me
belief,
that, man.
I'm sorry.
He's the only founding father I like, man. He's like the one guy who kind of had his shit together. I mean, he was
I used again. My again. No,
Universalist, really?
yeah, all of us were flawed, and myself included. Like, only look to Jesus if you want my true opinion. But
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, he was a Unitarian Universalist to what I read and to what I know. So
yeah.
maybe I'm wrong, but you
I'll
know what?
dig more into it because he is my guy
Let me know. Let me know. Let me
that I
know.
usually put forward as, definitely a
Well, they
flawed,
all were.
flawed man for sure. But I guess I kind of look at um, I don't know his fruits. Um, I guess I haven't really dug into other than
Yeah,
surface
right
level
here.
profession of
Adams
faith.
steered between deism and Calvinism, embracing a faith known as Christian Unitarianism or Christian deism. So he denied the deity of Jesus Christ, regarded him instead of as a savior, sent to preach, you know, sending him instead of a man just sent to preach peace and equality. So
Okay. Well, I've
let me know. Get back to
never
me on that.
noticed that. Yeah, God, I
Get back
wanna.
to me. Get back to me on
Where
that.
does that quote come from?
Let me get it specifically.
Yeah, because I'm
Right here.
not
Here's
saying.
from the Dictionary of Unitarian Universalist biography of him specifically.
Well,
So
dang it,
maybe the
I'm not.
Unitarians are just claiming him, but he's not.
Man, people claim people all the time, bro.
That is true.
I'm just
You
kidding,
could
man.
have.
You're tearing down one of my heroes. It's all right.
Hey, no heroes, man.
I know, I know, I know. But when you do this research and stuff like that, and you want to find somebody in that early revolution to cling
Well,
to and
there's
be
people
like,
that I do like. Like, I'm not
yeah,
gonna say that.
oh yeah, I mean,
I'm not gonna say I don't recommend or like anybody, whoever. Like, no, like
yeah,
everybody has flaws, myself included. Like I like Adrian Rogers. He turned down CMP. But I still
yeah,
have issues with him and his connections, possibly to the family and the fellowship or the steering of the Southern Baptist Convention.
right.
But I mean, like, so that I mean, I'm not saying none of us are perfect. It's just again, does John Adams does he believe that Jesus is God, or does he believe that Jesus was just a moral and righteous teacher? Because that's a big difference.
Yeah, and I know up there in those New England, they were steeped in Calvinism, and that always Calvinism kind of brushed up against and bled into deism. And God, those founding fathers were all, I think a lot of them too were young and kind of looking at
Except
what
for
was
Ben Franklin.
who was the devil.
I know Ben
The guy was
Franklin was
such
one
a
of the
piece
worst.
of shit. I mean, brilliant, clearly, and we probably don't have a country without him deciding at whatever point that he was going to back us, and do his part.
But
But
straight evil
but
man.
just a
Evil
piece of
man.
trash. And you look at his little buddy. So I think I did an entire podcast about how I think old TJ Thomas Jefferson. convinced that he killed that he had George Wythe killed, his mentor, for several reasons. One maybe even being access to the famed Bruton Vault in Williamsburg, which I know is a weird new age. It has been co-opted by the new age. Have you ever heard of the sages of the seventh seal coming from a new age theosophical uh
No, not offhand,
past?
but it doesn't. I don't know everything. No,
They
like
were they were a weird new agey kind of theosophical cult from the West Coast who was obsessed with Manly P. Hall and Francis Bacon, and really got jumped on the Manly P. Hall's wife's prediction of the Baconian vault underneath the church
hmm.
in Williamsburg, which I think there's something to it. I'm not sure what exactly it is, but there's enough evidence there to say that there could be something strange in that churchyard, especially considering she put out her research and the Rockefeller swooped right in, bought the whole town, kicked everybody out of their homes, and turned it into the Disneyland of history.
Hmm.
Um, the Williamsburg that we all know
Yeah,
now, where
I've been there.
yeah. So I grew up and, that was my backyard. And so I personally know three or four people who have entrances bricked up to the tunnels that go all under Williamsburg. Um, my research is all about William and Mary and the
So,
Masonic influence
so
there.
one
But
one last thing, and I got to go to bed.
yeah, I got to get going too. I could
But
talk to you forever
one
though.
last thing I would want to say is, have you ever heard of the theosophical retelling of the signing of the Declaration of Independence?
I have not. This sounds like
So
an amazing
Ronald
thing to
Reagan was a
end on.
Council for National Policy member, and he was also a theosophist. A lot of people don't know
Right.
that. And he would retell the telling of which happened in. Did it happen in Philadelphia? I'm tired. My brain is
Signing
fried.
of the Declaration. Yes, that happened in
Yes,
Philadelphia.
I
Yeah.
think so. Which again, you have Delphi, right? Which is the city of
Right.
brotherly love, but also you could also translate it to be love of the oracle of Delphi if we're going to go back
Right.
to, goddess worship. But anyway,
Yep.
um, the theosophical claim was that good old Count Saint Germain, right?
Okay.
Showed up and they didn't want to sign it. They didn't want to sign the deck. They were too worried. They were too worried. Didn't want to sign the Declaration of Independence. And Count de Saint Germain showed up and took a pen out and said, "You must sign it." Like it got everybody whipped up into a frenzy. Like you have to sign the Declaration of Independence, And then he disappeared, never to be seen from again. And they signed it, and the rest is history, right? So Ronald Reagan would go around, way before he was president,
Right.
go around and tell this story. So much so that you can go look it up of him publicly telling it, in speeches that are in the Reagan Memorial Library.
No shit.
But that's a theosophical retelling of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of this country that if would not happen if not for the Count de Saint Germain.
A mythological Gnostic
Exactly. Yes.
Rosicrucian
Yes.
character.
Yes.
So at least that far back imbuing our nation's founding with wow. All right, man. That's a pretty good place to end, brother.
It's insane. I mean, when
Yeah.
I found that out, and also one last big theosophist, of course, was Elvis Presley.
Yep.
Very big with Helena Roerich and the Roerichs. Um, a lot of people don't know that either. And I think with Presley, it is sad, man. They had him MK Ultra on drugs out of his
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, I
You
think so
know,
too. Yeah. Do you
um,
think one just final thought, do you see a possibility for some of these folks getting into theosophy innocently enough? I mean, I think we both know
yeah,
that
of course.
Gnosticism is kind of a reversal and thus blasphemy, right? But the way that it's presented, I feel like you could easily take. somebody new in the Christian faith, and start just slowly.
Well, that's why you have world servers through the Theosophical Society, right? So anybody who is part of the Theosophical Society or not who's pushing, like they had the infiltration of churches. That was Constance Cumby's work. Of just, and I've talked about it too. Of they had the New Agers literally meeting with the head of evangelicals in the 1980s. They claimed that
Really?
they're coming together to try to convert Barbara Bucks Hubbard and her crew, but no, no, it was a pushing of their belief systems in evangelical churches.
Wow.
Does that answer what you're asking me, Ernie? I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah.
you, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I
and
was
I
getting
mean,
at.
I mean, yeah, that's why we needed, like, my father was a born again Christian. He told me things that I just completely discarded, thinking my knowledge was greater than God's. And he defended the faith to me quite well. It's just when he died, I don't know what happened. It's just like that information just like went out of my head. Like we used to listen to Bill Cooper, and my
Yeah.
dad was a conspiracy theorist, but he would tell me a lot of stuff against theosophy and Gnosticism and stuff like that and everything. And I remember listening to, as Bill Cooper's hour at the time, about, Mystery Babylon, which Cooper got some things right, a lot of things right, some things wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember my dad, of course, my dad not believing in aliens and pushing that off to the side too and everything, and absolutely disgusted with Alex Jones,
Really?
hated him. Um, but I still fell into Gnosticism, and it was because my dad knew the Bible very well, very, very well, and that should have been enough. But he did die when I was 18, so that was, my mom was already past a pivotal point in my life, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know the history of the early church and the polemics against Gnosticism, right? That the early church did have kind of a unified belief. You can kind of look at it as the Apostles' Creed, which any born again Christian would uphold that.
Right.
And so they did kind of have that belief, and Gnosticism was being, fought against by, John's letters, even, where it's, if as a former Gnostic, you can read it and go, well, he's actually calling out Gnosticism. He's calling out
Right.
Docetism, and so like it's not, so it's like, one of the earliest, I guess in closing, I know we both gotta go, but one of the earliest Gnostics, a lot of people talk about Marcion. Um, and a lot of people falsely say the Council of Nicaea is who determined the canon, which is completely not true. It's a bunch of Dan Brown bull. Anyway,
That's where that they say the codices that they use for the newer translations of the Bible come from somehow influenced by Marcion.
that's what they say. You have, Codex Valentinus and Codex Sinaiticus, and that's a whole nother discussion. Like I don't
Yeah,
want to get
yeah.
too far in the weeds, but I don't think they had. You could take all of the You could take all the writings of the early church writers that we have, right, of the ante-Nicene, before the Nicene Council writers, and you could put together about, I think it's like 98% of the New Testament,
Right.
roughly, somewhere around there. And Second Clement quotes the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which is problematic. Like I don't
Right.
look at any, like I am sola scriptura, Bible's all you need, but for apologetics, it is good to know and read those other people, which
Yeah.
is just like reading a pastor today. They get some things wrong and they get some things right, and stuff like that and
Yeah.
everything. But Cerinthus was one of the first actual Gnostics that's not talked about before Marcion. He was a Judaizer. He was putting together kind of return to the Jewish faith with Gnosticism and putting it all in together in a blender, you know. So, you're kind of having a return to those two heresies. You're having a return to Gnosticism, you're having a return to Judaizing. And they're kind of, which direction do you want to go in? And people are being herded into each one of those directions. And it's a very
Yeah.
sad thing to see as a former Gnostic because, like, again, I think of the lack of the intellectualism. Like, if I would have known that the early church was pretty much in agreement with like the core tenets of belief of Christianity. If I would have known that, and it wasn't the Council for Nicaea, and it wasn't like all this, then I probably would not have fallen into Gnosticism.
Right.
I probably would have rejected it. Especially if I would have found out like non-commodity scrolls were Rockefeller funded, Elaine Pagels won numerous Rockefeller awards. It was like once God, showed me all that. And once I started, realizing like, okay, like this is what's going on, right? Because I'm looking like God's providential hand on my life and maybe allowed me going into Gnosticism so I can form polemics against it, not to be too long-winded. But, once I found all that, I was like, well, wait a minute, like Wilhelm Reich was a straight up pedophile. Like I know that's a whole other discussion, but like, like that's
Yeah.
hidden. He was run out of towns because through the orgasmic research, he was out of his the mouth of his own daughter, they were watching children masturbate.
Well,
But in New Age circles, he's upheld as some guy who fought against the FDA and the United States government. But
right.
Reich, like you can read, there's a book called Adventures in Orgasmatron, which completely deconstructs Wilhelm Reich. All right. And you can go read directly. He says, and I quote, this is blasphemy, that like the energy of Jesus, like the power of Jesus comes from the innocence of children. It's disgusting.
Wow.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
But but I mean, those were major points, with my testimony, which led me to just, again, I'm not a fan of Immanuel Kant's ethos, but I am an IATP like him. And he said I had to void knowledge to allow faith to come in.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong. I had to eventually go, okay, like, I don't know everything, God. I trust in you. And I'm not saying that we don't still learn and everything, but again, I could have been a person. That's what Gnosticism is, being saved by gnosis, being saved by knowledge, always
Mm.
searching for the truth and never coming to it,
Mm.
which is God.
Right. Dude, amen. I think that's it. I think you did it.
I'm
Dude,
glad we should do this more often, man. I loved it,
dude,
man.
anytime you want to, man, I make it a regular thing if you're up for it.
I'm up for it. I'm down. I'm down, Ernie. I'm down.
All right. All right. I'll email you. We'll talk about when we want to do it next then, man.
Sounds good, brother. Thank you for having me on. God bless
Hey,
each and every
thank
one of
you
you listening.
so much.
Have a
You
great
too,
night.
brother.
Bye.
You too, man. Bye.